I went ahead and purchased some red oak planks from Home Depot and marked them at 9 inches to cut them down on my miter saw. I thought for a while about what kind of design I wanted to do for the shelf, and after thinking about it for a while, oh, that's pretty much it. I'm going to be using this cheap dowel kit to put the two pieces of wood together, so after marking the wood, I went ahead and drilled the holes. Now, I don't know what these are called, but the kit came with these little pokey pieces, and you put them into the holes that you already drilled. Once you line up the two pieces of wood and push them together, it leaves a pretty nice indent so you can reference your corresponding holes for the dowels. After adding a little bit of glue to each of the holes, I could go ahead and put the dowels in and then use, of course, something that's not a hammer to try to drive these dowels in. As I was driving these dowels in, I noticed something pretty cool. The glue started to seep out of the end grain. I don't know, I thought it looked pretty cool. I thought I'd show you. After adding glue to the other side and lining up the dowels, I could go ahead and grab the appropriate tool, which in this case, of course, is not a hammer, and drove the pieces together. I added some clamps just to make sure that everything was nice and secure, and let this dry to the side while I worked on the next part. I then used a stud finder to try to find where the studs were so I could put the secret compartment, but the best type of stud finder is just poking a hole in the wall. So I went ahead and just did that. Luckily I didn't do too bad, and after removing this chunk of drywall, I found some studs. I could then go ahead and take some careful-ish measurements of this hole. I say careful-ish, but that's a little bit of foreshadowing, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I could then take my measurements over to my computer and quickly design a shell for the drawer to sit in. After it was designed, I could export it and slice the model and send it off to my printer. With it finally done printing, I could eagerly take it over to the wall and see if it fit. It doesn't fit. Remember when I said careful-ish measurements? Well, it turns out I shelled the design backwards, so the exterior dimensions were now the interior. In other words, it's just too big. So I carefully redesigned it and printed another one. With my fingers now crossed, I went ahead and tested it out, and luckily, it fit. All that was left to do was to mark out where these little mounting points overlap the drywall and cut those pieces out. With the drywall cut back, it was time to test it out, and it fit perfectly flush up against the wall. Perfect. I went ahead and printed the drawer out for the compartment and gave that a shot as well. Now, unfortunately, the tolerances were a bit too large, so it was a little loose, as you can see here with the very scientific wiggle test. Now, another problem that I had with this drawer were the walls. As you can see, they were way too thin, and because the weight of the shelf was going to be held on this drawer, I needed to redesign it. Which is fine, because it also broke. After yet another redesign and print, I now had a drawer that was much stronger. And even more important, it passed the wiggle test. In order to lock the compartment, I picked up these magnetic child locks that unlatch when a magnet comes close. Plus, they're just super fun to play with. I now need to figure out how to mount all the pieces to the lock inside this tiny drawer. Now, it did come with instructions, and after deciding I didn't need them, I then temporarily used some double-sided tape to align everything. This allowed me to just eyeball where all the components needed to go, and if they were off, I could then remove them and re-stick them until I found a proper mounting location. Now, this did take a couple tries, but I eventually got everything lined up. In order to secure the latch to the shell, I decided to just bolt it. So I drilled some holes dangerously close to my fingers and tested the bolts to make sure they fit. Now, this is going to lead to yet another problem, which we'll get to in a little bit. But for now, let's mount the drawer onto the shelf. Now, you may be thinking, how are you going to secure some screws into such a small drawer? Well, look at these holes that I geniusly designed in. After putting a screw into place, it allows me to drive a screwdriver in from the top and have access to the screw. Ah, not bad, right? Boing, here I come. Now, the keen among you might have realized with the hardware in place, I have no way of actually sliding the drawer into the shell. And rather than redesigning it for a third time, I decided to just mark it with a Sharpie and cut it back with a box cutter. Now that the drawer was cut back, I had enough clearance to slide the shell over the drawer. With everything assembled, it was now time to mount the shell into the wall. I made sure to pre-drill all the holes so that the screws wouldn't split the studs behind it. And now I could finally add the shelf onto the wall. The final step was to add these little hooks onto the shelf as key rings, just to give the shelf a little bit more functionality. With the shelf locked in place, it is pretty secure on the wall, as you can see here with the wiggle test, and it's only when we bring a magnet close to it that it unlocks and we have access to our compartment. The shelf functions as a pretty decent EDC shelf carrying my wallet and all of my keys, and the secret compartment is also large enough to hold all of my life savings. Not bad. But let me know down in the comments what you would put in here. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a like, and subscribe to stay tuned for any future videos. And as always, thanks for watching.